Hopefully by now you've watched our recent video of the MSI GF66 Katana gaming laptop. In this one, we're taking a look at a similar but higher spec laptop, also from MSI, the Crosshair 15 Rainbow 6 Extraction Edition. Hardware comes in the form of an Intel Core i7-12700H processor, an RTX 3070 laptop GPU, 32 gigs of DDR4 memory, a 1TB SSD, and, arguably the star of the show, a 15.6-inch 2560 by 1440 165Hz IPS-level display. With a going price in late May of around £1,739 in the UK, although that has now risen to around £2,000 to £2,200 in the week or so since initial script writing, let's take a closer look at what you get for your money. In terms of design, the Crosshair 15 R6E is very similar to the Katana GF66 that we recently reviewed, other than of course the Rainbow 6 Extraction Edition branding, so yellow and kind of interesting design choices. I'm not going to pass comment on them. I'll refer to them as unique because clearly this is personal preference, but yeah, those splashes of yellow are interesting. Of course they do fit with the game, I guess. This is pretty much a generic 15.6-inch laptop chassis, and it's certainly not designed to be sleek and portable. At well over 30mm thick in some areas with the lid closed, and still 26.9mm thick even with the lid open, this is very much a park-it-on-the-table gaming laptop. The 2.47kg weight and chunky 240-watt power brick back up that point. Importantly though, to many gamers, is the strong allocation of ventilation gaps for adequate cooling. Plus the thickness means that a solid chunk of heatsink can be squeezed inside MSI's unit. Under the hood hardware starts with the Intel Core i7-12700H processor. Graphics comes in the form of an Nvidia RTX 3070 8GB laptop GPU. This is rated at 140 watts maximum power in MSI's deployment, according to the spec sheet. 140 watts of RTX 3070 goodness should be pretty zippy, even at this price point where a 3080 is a wallet stretch too far. Important to note though is that it's the integrated Intel Iris Xe graphics that are directly connected to the display in the laptop, so bear that in mind for those of you who are interested in mux switches. Memory is 2x16GB of DDR4 3200MHz in SODIMM form, and I'm perfectly fine with that because you've got two SODIMM slots so you can upgrade quite easily. I'm also absolutely fine with the decision to use DDR4 rather than DDR5 because it helps MSI hit the budget a little bit better. And on the SSD front, you get dual M.2 slots built into the laptop, and one of those is occupied with the 1TB PCIe Gen 4x4 SSD. Focusing on the screen, we are treated to a 15.6-inch 2560 by 1440 IPS-level display. We feel that the combination of size and resolution is perfect for a laptop at this price point, and that's particularly true when the impressive 165Hz refresh rate is factored in. The screen quality is actually good too. It's rated at 100% DCI P3 typical, which means that color accuracy is a strength and the contrast was good to my eyes. Peak brightness was definitely lacking though, so anybody wanting to do gaming outside on a bright day may struggle. But the image quality, pixel density from the resolution, and smooth motion from the 165Hz refresh rate make a really appealing combination, particularly to gamers. Physical connectivity for MSI's now roughly £2,000 Crosshair 15 R6E is the same as for the often £900 cheaper Katana GF66. I regarded that laptop as having pretty poor connectivity and is clearly over £600 cheaper, so MSI's choices here are abysmal, quite frankly. You get three 5GB per second USB ports, one of which is Type-C, and with a USB 2 Type-A port to round out the bundle. That's right, there's no 10 or 20GB per second USB connectivity on this laptop, never mind Thunderbolt 4. The only video output is 4K 60 HDMI, as the Type-C does not support video or power. Gigabit Ethernet and a combo audio jack are fine, and then there's the barrel style power connector. A single video output, 5GB per second USB, and no Type-C charging. MSI's port selection for this Crosshair 15 is outrageously bad. If we look at the Asus Tough Gaming F15 competitor laptop, just as an example, you get Thunderbolt 4, 10 gigabits per second USB-C with DisplayPort and G-Sync capability, and no silly USB 2 port. And that laptop is actually cheaper than MSI's. Yes, Intel 802.11ax Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2 are deployed on the Crosshair 15, but they simply do not detract from the fact that MSI's port offering is simply terrible. In terms of peripherals, it's once again very similar to the MSI Katana GF66, so my feedback will once again be very similar. There's a 720p 30 webcam, but it doesn't support Windows Hello and there's no fingerprint scanner, so advanced sign-in options are very limited. The speakers are a pair of 2-watt units, which genuinely surprised me for decent punch to the bass, good maximum loudness, and solid ability to maintain decent quality at high volume outputs. Trackpad sizing is very modest, even on this large laptop chassis. Yes, I have big hands, but the trackpad is still not particularly large anyway. With that said, the responsiveness and flow of the implementation and the solid clicky buttons were good. The keyboard is good for my personal preference and my large hands. I had very few accidental key strikes because of the sensible key pitch. I also felt that the actuation point of the 1.7mm high keys was clear and firm, which enhanced comfort. And MSI includes a number pad, which I personally find pointless, but it is there. The keyboard backlighting is inspired by Rainbow Six Extraction game colours, with 3 steps of brightness and a completely off option. MSI uses green for the lower third, blue/white for the middle third, and yellow for the upper third. The WASD keys are presented in a different style though. I really don't have any complaints with the keyboard, to be honest. Its styling is unique, but the quality is good in my opinion. For the battery, a 90 watt hour 4-cell unit is deployed and used in combination with the 240 watt power brick. There's no USB-C charging for trickle top-ups, which is disappointing to me. UK pricing for the MSI Crosshair 15 R6E, and let me get the specific model code, B12UGZ-299UK, there's no way I'm repeating that. So resale pricing for this model is around about £2,200 it seems, but recently we have seen some e-tailers bringing that down to £1,739. However, as of early June, a few days after writing this original script, actual availability pricing looks to be around the £2,000 mark once again, with that £1,739 pricing basically gone. This makes Asus's RTX 3070 equipped 16GB DDR5 Tough Gaming F15 a direct competitor at around £1,700, or the AMD Ryzen 7 6800H alternative Tough Gaming A15 also at around £1,700. So I think that covers our introduction and our closer look at the laptop. Let's get into testing. As usual, we test in the out-of-the-box state with our given laptops, and we typically use the recommended power profile, which in this instance is balanced. We first look at the installed software, which isn't too bad from MSI, to be honest. They've actually improved over recent generations. But one of the first tasks was to uninstall Norton antivirus. Of course, we applied Windows updates, and then we updated the BIOS because ours was out of date. MSI Center is certainly more lightweight than previous iterations. It's basically only really good for messing around with the gaming mode or choosing your power profiles currently. There's no fast charge capability in there. There's no ability to toggle up to, say, 90% battery if you want. And the update on the app side of things just wasn't very good because we had drivers that clearly needed updating, but MSI software didn't suggest they needed to. As always, with the comparison data, we have a batch of recently tested laptops in the charts, and if you want to see more information on those, then do check out the individual reviews by myself or Leo on the Kickaroo YouTube channel and on the main web page. And if you want more information about our test procedures, the games we're using, etc., then head on over to the Kickaroo webpage. Let's jump into the results. Just as we saw with the cheap Katana GF66 that we reviewed recently, MSI runs the balanced power profile with the Core i7-12700H CPU getting around 38 watts sustained power under long duration Cinebench loading. The average P-Core's clock speed was once again in the vicinity of 2.2 GHz steady state. This means that there is CPU performance left on the table that can be extracted by using the more aggressive power profiles, such as Extreme Performance. With both the CPU and GPU being loaded in a gaming scenario under the balanced profile, we saw the power allocation trending at around 150 watts combined. This was typically segregated as around 30 to 35 watts for the CPU and 110 to 125 watts for the GPU. That translated into around mid 2 GHz for the CPU P cores, with a temperature around the mid 90C mark and often button up against the 99 degrees Celsius throttling point. And we recorded around 1450 MHz average for the RTX 3070 laptop GPU clocks, with a temperature around the high 80s mark. As was the case with the Katana GF66, MSI's recommended balanced power profile clearly left performance on the table, so we tested out the extreme power profile with the fan set to cooler boost. Of course, the noise output was unpleasant and was certainly not something for general usage or even headphones gaming, but this does highlight the laptop's capabilities with the maximum cooling might thrown at our tasks. The CPU only load saw power budget ramp up to around 75 to 80 watts sustained. Package temperature for the Core i7-12700H was mid-90s, but did just enough to stay away from the 99 degrees Celsius throttling point in general. Clock speeds on the P cores increased from the balanced power profile by around 1 GHz to around 3.2 GHz. This is almost identical CPU biased behaviour that we saw on the Katana GF66, with its Core i7-12700H running extreme performance cooler boost mode. For gaming, we actually saw some bump up in the performance by applying the extreme power mode with cooler boost fans. The combined CPU and GPU power jumped by around 10 to 15 watts, up to around 160 watts typical. The GPU seemed to get a similar allocation as the balanced power profile, that is around 120 watts typical for 1470 MHz. But now, the power threshold was highlighted as the GPU boost limiting factor instead of thermals, as with the balanced and standard cooling mode. This has a net result of dropping the GPU temperature by around 17 degrees Celsius down to 70 degrees Celsius. The CPU is fed with more power now that the cooling allocation had increased. We saw the chip getting around 35 to 55 watts, but mainly 45 to 55 watts allocated. This resulted in improved clock speeds that were around the 3 GHz mark. Temperatures were still lofty at low to mid 90s, but there wasn't major thermal throttling. Noise output for gaming usage with the balanced power profile was fine. I didn't have too many complaints running this laptop without headphones, and with headphones, I think the fans could even be pushed a bit faster to allow for improved temperatures whilst maintaining tolerable noise output. The Micron 2450 SSD performance is mediocre, and I actually want a little more from a laptop of this caliber. The SSD is PCIe Gen 4 in name only, as the performance doesn't really push past Gen 3 speeds. Drive cooling was fine, even with heavy, sustained write operations. Battery life is actually pretty reasonable for this configuration of laptop. We managed around 5.5 hours even with the screen maintained at its 83 to 165 Hz dynamic refresh rate. That's really pretty good, and is thanks largely to the 90 watt-hour battery. I'd have liked to see USB-C charging, but with decent battery life anyway, it's perhaps less important. Oh, and by the way, the charge rate from dead was a slow 52 watts, even using the included 240 watt power brick. If you've already watched our MSI Katana GF66 gaming laptop review, then the analysis with this Crosshair 15 will be similar. They both use the same Intel Core i7-12700H processor with very similar power configurations. MSI does well to hang with the Ryzen competitors in the short Cinebench test run, but the longer duration Blender tests really play into the hands of competing Ryzen laptops that are better able to sustain their power output. Handbrake shows a similar trend. Ryzen competition is much faster than the Core i7-12700H in MSI's roughly 38 watts sustained power mode. 7-zip performance is very similar to the 12700H in the Katana, but once again, AMD's 35 watt and 45 watt class Ryzen chips are notably quicker. Memory bandwidth for the 32GB DDR4 3200MHz set of memory is fine, and is only handsomely beaten by LPDDR4 or LPDDR5. Latency of the set is good too, and I have no problems with the DDR4 being used in a laptop of this caliber, as opposed to newer and more expensive DDR5. Single-threaded performance is where the Core i7-12700H and its lofty clocks inside the MSI Crosshair 15 R6E are strong, particularly against even Ryzen 6000 competition. As expected though, the performance drop-off with sustained Cinebench multi-threaded loading is notable due to Intel's CPU power curves. That's even with the hearty cooling setup for MSI's laptop factored in, as it's the balanced power mode controlling sustained CPU power here. 3DMark Time Spy positions the Crosshair 15 R6E well below its Katana GF66 sibling. This is interesting and likely points towards power sharing biases when the CPU and GPU are both loaded simultaneously, particularly as we see similar behaviour and scoring in the 3DMark CPU profile test. PC Mark 10, with its less strenuous workload, has the Crosshair 15 back to typical Intel 12th gen performance levels though. Starting out with 1080p performance against the competing laptops, we see Assassin's Creed Valhalla running at a comfortable 82 FPS average on the Crosshair 15 R6E. Borderlands 3 also sees the 140W RTX 3070 flex its muscle with 1% low FPS numbers, almost hitting the golden 60 FPS level. F1 2020 is well into the range of pushing this high refresh rate display at its nominal 165Hz refresh rate. Far Cry 6 is far more CPU biased though, and struggles to outperform on the Crosshair 15 R6E and its 12700H versus the rising competitors with slower GPUs. Normal order is resumed in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, with the 12700H and RTX 3070 140W combining for an average FPS of above 120. And Watch Dogs Legion results in another second place finish for the Crosshair 15 R6E, with only the Core i9 and high-powered RTX 3080 eGPU Asus solution being quicker. For 1080p gaming, the high power budget of 140W allocated to the RTX 3070 and MSI's Crosshair 15 R6E does very well indeed. There's a very strong chance that you'll be able to push even relatively modern AAA titles well into triple-digit FPS for a smooth gaming experience. If you want to crank the resolution up to the laptop's native 1440p though, that's going to take more GPU horsepower. So let's see how the laptop performs at 1440p, albeit when run into an external display to keep absolute consistency with the competing laptop's test data. With the limitations of an external GPU link not an issue, MSI's Crosshair 15 R6E does very well to match the 131 FPS average of Asus's RTX 3080 eGPU solution in F1 2020. Far Cry 6 performance is also very strong on the average, but limitations of the CPU power budget result in far less competitive 1% low FPS values. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, however, is an excellent result with MSI's RTX 3070 equipped unit taking top spot in our chart thanks to a triple-digit average FPS number and strong minimums. And we see another first place finish in Watch Dogs Legion from MSI, though this time the average FPS number is bordering at the point where a reduction in image quality may be sensible. MSI's Crosshair 15 R6E does very well in our 1440p gaming test and scores higher than we anticipated even versus the RTX 3080 solution from Asus, albeit an eGPU solution. That healthy 140W power allocation to the RTX 3070 really is a smart move by MSI, as it frees up ample clock speed headroom for the GPU to push solid frame rates, even at the lofty 2560 by 1440 resolution. If we round this one out, it's perfectly clear that the MSI Crosshair 15 R6E is a powerful gaming laptop. But that's exactly what we would expect when dropping around $2,000 on a unit from a reputable vendor. MSI does well to squeeze the 140W rated RTX 3070 laptop GPU and Core i7-12700H CPU into this unit and keep them both running happy. The power allocation in the balanced operating mode was smart, and there was extra performance available from the extreme mode if you wanted it. Plus, the cooling configuration is solid, especially if you want to ramp up those fans to annoying acoustic levels. 32 gigs of DDR4 memory, a 1TB PCIe Gen 4 SSD, and clear upgrade paths for both of those components is very good to see. But really, it's that 165Hz Quad HD display that performs really well, particularly with the fluidity of motion during gaming, and the colour accuracy, to be perfectly honest. I don't think MSI is going to win any design awards for the Crosshair 15 R6E. The chassis is more plasticky than I'd have liked, and the screen has clear flex to it if pushed. Plus the chosen colour options, while they match the game design, are certainly hit or miss depending on your personal preference. Battery life from the 90 watt-hour unit is good, but I'd have certainly liked to see USB-C charging supported. And that brings us nicely to the port selection and capability, which is a complete and utter joke from MSI. Slow USB ports, only one display output, and just the single Type-C connector. What is this, MSI? 2019? I mean, seriously? You just have to look at the Asus competitor, which I must add is cheaper, and you get Thunderbolt 4, proper USB-C connectivity, and multiple display outputs. Taking the port selection from laptops more than £600 cheaper and replicating the outputs on a $2,000 model. Who at MSI thought that would be a good idea? Did somebody not think an extra £600+ spent on a laptop would appeal to, I don't know, a different user. So yeah, I guess my feelings on the ports and connectivity are perfectly clear. If you think I'm being pedantic, then let me know in the comment section down below. But if you do think that just the single display output, slow USB, and just one Type-C port is not really very good in 2022, then please do also let me know in the comment section down below. Rounding this one out then, stiff competition for the Crosshair 15 R6E comes from Asus's Tough Gaming F15 and A15 laptops in particular. I think the Asus AMD based model at £1,700 could be a particular obstacle for the MSI laptop at this price point, particularly as we saw the 16-thread 45-watt Ryzen chips offering significantly higher compute performance at sensible power levels. With that said, the Crosshair 15 R6E definitely has enough strengths going its way to make it a compelling option at £1,739, but with the price now back up at the £2,000 and slightly higher level, that completely ruins this model's competitiveness in my opinion. You're paying a really, really hefty premium for that upgrade from 16 gigs to 32 gigs of RAM, and it just really isn't worth it in my opinion. I've been Luke Hill for Kicker. Thank you for watching our video review of the MSI Crosshair 15 R6E. There's no way I'm saying that silly model code again, because the video is going to be about 10 hours long if I even bother to try with all the bloopers. If you like this video, give us a like and subscribe. Do all the usual YouTube stuff, and please do let us know your opinion on the comment section down below. Check out the main written review on the Kicker webpage, that really helps us out. Interact with us on social media, Discord and the likes, and I will catch you in the next one.